Hi, my name is Rachel, and I'm 31 years old. I was born into a legacy I was never meant to inherit, and nearly erased from it by the woman who pretended to raise me. Growing up in Lexington, Virginia, I lived in a house that looked like it came straight out of a Southern historical novel. White columns, green shutters, and a driveway so long you couldn't see the road from the porch. But no matter how beautiful it looked from the outside, the truth of my childhood was far from idyllic. My biological mother passed away when I was a baby. I never really knew her, only the faded photographs and a single locket she left behind. My father, Walter Bennett, was a retired Navy commander, stern, disciplined, and brilliant. He raised me alone for the first 8 years of my life until he remarried a woman named Patricia. Patricia Bennett. Beautiful, poised, always impeccably dressed. On the surface, she was every bit the elegant Southern stepmother. But beneath her polished exterior was something far colder. She never outright said she resented me, but it was there, in the way she smiled when I cried, the way her touch lingered too long when she was angry, and the way she called me, her husband's burden, behind closed doors when she thought I couldn't hear. Things changed fast after she had her own children, Logan and Jessica. Twins. Perfect, golden-haired, charming. Where I was forgotten, they were celebrated. Every honor roll certificate of mine was met with a lukewarm nod. Every participation trophy they brought home was treated like Olympic gold. It became clear early on, I didn't belong. Not to them. Not to this new version of the Bennett family. I tried to earn their love anyway. I cleaned my room, helped with chores, stayed out of trouble. I brought home top grades and eventually earned a scholarship to a top military prep school. My father, despite Patricia's disapproval, supported me. He believed in structure, discipline, and legacy, and in me. I lived for those rare moments when he looked at me and said, "You're stronger than they'll ever give you credit for, Rachel." But the truth is, I didn't feel strong. By the time I graduated high school, the house felt more like a battlefield than a home. Logan had grown into the golden boy, the athlete, the speaker, the legacy in the making. Jessica was clever and poised, her mother's favorite in every way. I was the shadow, the one who only came home on holidays, who sat at the table but never truly belonged. Things took a final turn the day I announced I'd been accepted into the U.S. Army Officer Candidate School. Walter beamed with pride. "You'll make us proud, Rachel," he said, his voice breaking slightly. Patricia didn't even stand from her seat. She just nodded, lips tight. "It's your life," she said coolly. "Just make sure you don't embarrass the family name." Those words haunted me through basic training, through combat zones, through years of silence from home. Letters came rarely. Walter tried. But he was older, and eventually the updates stopped altogether. Until the letter came. It was crisp, formal, typed, not handwritten. "Commander Walter Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep. Services will be held at the Bennett Family Chapel. Family only. Family only." I stared at that line for what felt like hours. I was family, wasn't I? My hands trembled as I reread it, over and over. No personal note. No mention of me by name. Just a time, a date, and a warning. I wasn't welcome. I sat on my bunk in the barracks, staring at that cold, sterile letter. The grief hit like a wave, but behind it, something colder. Something sharper. A question I couldn't shake. Why wasn't I included? Why wasn't I named? What were they trying to hide? And that, right there, was the beginning of everything. The beginning of uncovering a betrayal so calculated, so cruel, it would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and blood. But at that moment, sitting on that metal cot with only my duffel bag at my feet and my heart cracking in my chest, I had no idea what was waiting for me back home in Lexington. Only that I had to go back. No matter what they tried to hide, I was going to find it. I arrived in Lexington 2 days before the funeral. The town hadn't changed much. The old diner on Main Street still had the same faded awning, and the hardware store still had the American flag fluttering proudly above its door. But my childhood home, the Bennett estate, looked like something out of a Southern Living magazine. Freshly painted shutters, manicured hedges, A brand new security gate with a buzzing keypad. It was a fortress now. I parked my rental car just outside the gate, heart pounding as I stared up at the place that used to be mine, used to be ours. I punched the call button and waited. A cold, mechanical voice greeted me. "State your name." "This is Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "Rachel Bennett." Silence. Then a long beep. The gate didn't open. I tried again. "This is Rachel. I received the funeral notice. I need to speak with Patricia." Another pause. And then the intercom crackled to life again. "The funeral is private. You're not welcome here." Click. I stood there for several moments, stunned. My ears buzzed with heat. Not welcome? At my father's funeral? I drove away, shaking, humiliated, but not broken. I wasn't going to give up that easily. I found a small motel on the edge of town, checked in under my military ID, and stared at the funeral details again. I still had time. The service was scheduled at the chapel on the estate grounds, a place built by my great-grandfather. If I couldn't come through the front, I'd go another way. And that's what I did. 2 mornings later, dressed in full military uniform, deep navy blues, polished insignia, my ribbons pinned precisely, I arrived at the back entrance of the chapel just as the service began. I walked through the side garden gate my father used to leave unlocked, the one hidden behind a stone wall covered in ivy. Inside, the chapel smelled of lilies and old cedar. The pews were lined with people I didn't recognize, distant relatives, colleagues, sycophants. But in the front row sat Patricia, flanked by Logan and Jessica, both dressed in black. Logan had his arm draped protectively around his mother. Jessica dabbed her eyes dramatically with a silk handkerchief. Their performance was flawless. I stood in the aisle for a moment, waiting for someone to turn. But no one did. I took my place near the back, refusing to sit. I didn't want to be mistaken for a guest. When the eulogy began, it wasn't the family chaplain who spoke. It was Logan. He stood at the podium with practiced ease, his voice confident and clear. Walter Bennett was a great man. A man of legacy. A man who believed in family, in tradition. I felt my stomach twist. And he entrusted his future, and this estate, to those of us who will carry his values forward. I froze. Those words, entrusted his future, rang with a strange finality. When the service ended and people slowly filed out, I stayed behind. I walked up to the casket alone. My father's face looked peaceful, but distant. I whispered the only thing I could manage. "I'm here, Dad. Even if they tried to erase me, I'm still here." Then I turned and walked out before Patricia could cause a scene. But I saw it. I saw the exact moment her eyes met mine. Cold, calculating, and completely unsurprised. She knew I would come, and she was ready. Later that evening, I received a letter slid under my motel door. No envelope, no signature. "If you're looking for answers, you won't find them in that house. But you may want to speak with Mr. Holloway, the lawyer. Ask for the revised will." That was the moment I realized this went deeper than exclusion. This was war. They weren't just trying to cut me out emotionally. They had erased me from my father's legacy. And someone inside that house knew the truth and wanted me to uncover it. I stood there, frozen, as Patricia's voice rang out behind me like a death sentence. "This house was never yours," she sneered. My grip on the doorframe tightened. My mind was spinning, but my heart was still, strangely calm, like the silence before a storm. Logan and Jessica stood behind her, arms folded, their expressions smug. Not once did they meet my eyes. I had known something was wrong for weeks. The strange documents Patricia kept locking in her study. The whispers that stopped when I walked into a room. The way Logan avoided conversation, brushing off every question with an "it's nothing." I wasn't stupid. I just hadn't wanted to admit what I already knew. They were taking everything. The house. The trust fund. My name. Patricia moved past me, her heels sharp against the hardwood, walking like she already owned the place. Maybe she thought she did. I followed her slowly, like a ghost trailing behind the living. She made a beeline for the hallway closet and yanked it open, tossing out one of my old coats like it was trash. "You've had your time here, Rachel," she said, not even looking at me. "It's time to grow up and move on. You've been coddled long enough." Coddled? My hands clenched into fists. Every late night studying, every sacrifice I made to keep things calm, every moment I bit my tongue just to avoid conflict, it meant nothing to her. I looked at Logan, silently begging for a flicker of guilt, of hesitation. But all I got was indifference. He stepped forward and said, "Rachel, it's already done. The papers are signed. The lawyer said the transfer's legal." My stomach turned. "What lawyer?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia smiled. "My lawyer. Not that it matters now." She walked back toward the living room, her eyes scanning the space like she was mentally redesigning it already. "You should pack tonight. I've arranged a moving service for tomorrow morning. Let's not drag this out." I stared at her. My entire life had been in this house. My father had built it brick by brick, and every memory I held dear lived within these walls. Birthdays, thunderstorms, quiet Sunday mornings with cinnamon rolls and old jazz on the radio. And now, because of signatures and bloodlines, it was being handed over to the children of a woman who once told me I was a burden. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice low but firm. Patricia tilted her head. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, as if speaking to a child. "You are. You just don't know it yet." Logan opened his mouth, but Jessica cut in. "We tried to be nice about it," she said, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "You didn't exactly make this easy." I laughed, bitter and broken. "You think this is easy for me? You blindsided me. You let me believe I was part of this family." Patricia turned toward me sharply. "You were allowed to stay because of your father. He's gone now. And I'm not obligated to let you cling to something that's no longer yours." It was then that I realized the truth. This was never about legal rights. It was about control. Patricia had waited for years, biding her time, waiting until the one person who protected me, my father, was no longer here. And now, she was reclaiming the house, the assets, the legacy, and rewriting the family narrative to exclude me completely. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf in the corner, ran my fingers over the spines, and pulled out the only thing that mattered, a small, leather-bound album my father had made for me when I turned 18. Inside were letters he had written over the years, words he never quite found the courage to say out loud. I clutched it to my chest, turned back to them, and said softly, "You can take the walls, but you'll never take what he gave me." And then I left. No suitcase. No shoes. Just the album and the fire building inside me. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. I walked for blocks in the cold, my breath visible in the night air, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The sky was dark above, but my thoughts were darker. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't turn back. That house, the one filled with my childhood memories, was no longer mine. Patricia had made sure of that. But she hadn't taken everything. Not yet. The only person I could think to call was Camille. She'd been my best friend since high school, loyal, fierce, and blunt in the way only true friends can be. I still remembered how she once threw a drink in a guy's face for insulting me at prom. She never asked questions. She just stood beside me. I found a bus shelter near the corner of Maple and Fifth, sat down, and pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled as I typed. "Can I crash at your place for a few nights?" "Please. I'll explain everything." The reply came in seconds. "Where are you?" "I'm coming." She didn't ask why. She didn't make me beg. Within 20 minutes, her silver SUV pulled up. I climbed in, still barefoot, still holding the album like a lifeline. Camille took one look at me and didn't say anything. She just reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. That alone broke me. Silent tears spilled down my cheeks, but I wiped them quickly. I was done crying over them. Over people who never truly loved me. Her apartment smelled like eucalyptus and safety. She handed me a warm blanket, made tea, and finally sat across from me on the couch. Start talking, she said softly. I told her everything. From the first odd behavior to the moment Patricia threw out my coat like garbage. Camille's jaw tightened more with every detail. So they forged the documents? Transferred everything into Logan and Jessica's names behind her back. I nodded. Patricia planned this for years. She waited until my father passed and then she struck. She's a vulture, Camille spat. And Logan? He went along with it. I think he convinced himself he earned it somehow. That I was just in the way. Camille shook her head in disbelief. You're not going to let them get away with this, are you? My silence was her answer. I don't have much, I finally said. No job right now. No lawyer. No place of my own. Camille didn't hesitate. Then we start there. That night, something shifted inside me. I had always been quiet. Always chosen peace over confrontation. But not anymore. Patricia wanted me erased. She wanted my father's legacy rewritten in her name, handed down to her children as if I never existed. But I existed. And I would not be erased. The next morning, I borrowed Camille's laptop and started researching. I dug into the trust documents, found old emails from my father's lawyer, and tried to trace how Patricia had gotten control. The more I read, the more I realized there had to be loopholes. If my father had named me as the beneficiary, how had she changed it? I needed someone who knew how to read legal codes. Someone with a sharp mind and a bigger sense of justice. Camille leaned over my shoulder and said, You need someone ruthless and brilliant. I know just the guy. I looked up at her, eyes narrowing. Who? She smirked. His name's Mason. He's a contract lawyer. Total shark. Helped my cousin sue her ex over business fraud. He owes me a favor. And that's how, 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from Mason Carter in a downtown law office. He looked like he hadn't smiled in 5 years and probably billed $500 an hour. But when I explained my case, he listened intently. Then he leaned back and said, They forged the amendment. If we can prove it, we'll shred them in court. I swallowed hard. Do I have a chance? He nodded slowly. More than a chance. Especially if your father left anything at all, in writing about you being the heir. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather-bound album. He did. Mason took it carefully, like it was evidence. Then let's begin. That moment I knew I wasn't powerless anymore. I had a team. I had truth. And most of all, I had resolve. It was time to fight. The following weeks felt like a war fought in silence, papers instead of weapons, courtrooms instead of battlegrounds. But make no mistake, this was war. Mason worked like a machine. He dissected every line of the forged trust amendment Patricia had submitted. Meanwhile, I spent long hours pulling together anything my father had left behind that could prove his true intentions. Birthday letters, recorded voicemails, even old emails where he had told friends, in no uncertain terms, that everything he had would go to me. The hardest part wasn't the legal fight. It was the emotional one. Every time I saw Logan's name on those legal documents, something inside me twisted. We had grown up sharing crayons and late-night snacks. Now he was standing across from me in court filings, not as a brother but as a thief. Jessica didn't surprise me as much. Even as kids, she was cold and calculating. But Logan? He was supposed to be better. I wanted to scream at him, shake him, ask why. But instead, I kept my head down. Mason's words echoed in my mind. Emotion wins sympathy. Evidence wins court. 2 weeks in, Patricia's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer. They were willing to give me a small payout in exchange for dropping the claim. It was insulting. They're scared, Mason said calmly. This is panic disguised as generosity. I looked at the offer, laughed bitterly, and pushed it back across the table. They didn't just take money. They took my name. My legacy. Let's go to court. Camille cheered when I told her. That's my girl. In the meantime, the tension in town grew. Word had started to get around. My family, once admired for their wealth and respectability, were now the subjects of whispers. People questioned the sudden transfer of the estate. Some quietly reached out to me, family, friends, neighbors, offering their support. But Patricia wasn't backing down. She showed up in court in designer suits, her expression a perfect mask of dignity. Jessica and Logan sat beside her, trying to look innocent. But their eyes darted nervously every time Mason presented something new. The courtroom was cold the day I took the stand. I sat there, hands folded tightly, heart racing as Mason asked me to recount everything. I spoke about my father's promises, his values, his handwritten letters. I described how Patricia's behavior changed after his passing, how she subtly pushed me aside, how she isolated me. Then Mason presented the album. My father's voice echoed in the court through a video clip, a birthday message recorded just months before his death. Rachel, my everything is yours. Always will be. No one will ever come between us. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in months. The courtroom was silent, every head turned toward the screen. Even the judge leaned in. I saw Logan's head drop. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Patricia's jaw tightened like stone. By the time I stepped off the stand, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of my soul. But the court battles weren't over. Patricia's team tried to argue that my father wasn't of sound mind when he recorded that message, that he had been manipulated by me. It was a cruel twist, accusing the victim to save the thieves. But Mason was ready. He brought in Dr. Elliot, my father's physician, who testified with clarity and strength. Mr. Davis was sharp, coherent, and mentally fit until the day he passed. He knew what he was doing. With every testimony, our case strengthened. And with every appearance, Patricia's mask cracked just a little more. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. Court battles don't end in a day. But I had something stronger than panic or fear now. I had the truth. And I had proof. The final hearing was approaching. And whether they liked it or not, the truth was about to rise. The final day in court arrived cloaked in gray skies and quiet tension. I stood outside the courthouse in a navy coat, fingers trembling slightly despite the summer heat. Mason gave me a reassuring nod as we stepped inside. This was it, everything we had fought for, every sleepless night, every letter and record gathered, every suppressed tear, it all came down to today. Inside the courtroom, Patricia sat stiffly beside Logan and Jessica. Her hair was perfectly styled, her pearl earrings gleaming like tiny shields. But her posture betrayed her, rigid, cold, defensive. Logan looked pale, eyes darting around as if searching for an exit no one could see. Jessica, stone-faced as always, scrolled through her phone until the judge walked in. As the proceedings began, Mason delivered his closing arguments with quiet precision. He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid out the facts like a master craftsman setting down pieces of a puzzle that, once complete, revealed a devastating picture of greed and betrayal. Then Patricia's attorney stood, trying to discredit my father's final video message and our witnesses. But there was no heart in their case, just tactics. The truth was undeniable. The judge saw it. Everyone in that room felt it. Finally, the judge leaned forward, eyes heavy with consideration, and said the words I had been holding my breath to hear. The court finds that the trust amendment presented by the defendants is fraudulent. The original inheritance remains valid. All properties and assets will be returned to the rightful beneficiary, Rachel Davis. Time stopped. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just breathed, a deep, long breath that felt like freedom. Patricia's face turned to ice. Jessica stood up abruptly, whispering something harsh under her breath. But Logan looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. I turned and walked out before they could say another word. Outside the courthouse, Camille ran to me and threw her arms around my shoulders. You did it, she cried. You got it all back. But it didn't feel like victory. Not entirely. What I got back was what was already mine. What I had lost was the illusion of family. And no court could restore that. In the days that followed, the reversal of property took place swiftly. The house that had been mine, The one Patricia had tried to occupy and decorate in gold was returned to me. I walked through it slowly, touching the furniture my father had once chosen, seeing the pictures she had removed, now placed back where they belonged. But it wasn't just about a house. It was about identity, about honor, about truth. Patricia and Jessica left town quietly, unable to face the public after everything came out. Logan stayed behind. One morning, I saw him waiting by the gate. I stepped out cautiously. He looked up, eyes weary. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know it would go this far." "You let it," I replied simply. "You had choices." He nodded. "I did. And I made the wrong ones." I didn't offer forgiveness. Not then. Maybe not ever. But I walked away without anger in my chest, and that was enough. I spent the next year rebuilding my life. With the inheritance restored, I expanded my design business, moved some operations to a new office in Portland, and hired 3 young creatives looking for their first break, just like I once was. I traveled, I healed. Slowly. And one crisp October morning, I stood outside that house, my father's house, coffee in hand, wind playing with my hair, and smiled. Not because it was over, but because I had survived. And now it was finally mine.